Welcome back to The World Needs a Little Talk. This week, we'll be looking at The Lord of the World, a novel picked out by Professor Umbarger.
Yeah. Enough of the secular crap.
Yeah. Finally, we're going to talk Catholicism.
That's
and
right. Yeah, and a bunch of it.
Yeah.
This is an uber Catholic novel.
So I actually don't have my physical copy yet. It has not been arrived, but I've been audiobooking, as you guys are aware. I commonly do for our reads. But
I noticed you wrote down page numbers though. Can you?
No, actually, those
those
aren't page. That was a separate paper I had notes on for something else entirely, and then I
It threw me off
to
the
jot something. So.
I thought this is amazing. Like, did they tell you?
They do not. Those were they were complete guesses. I was like, it's from my experience of all the audiobooks. I was like, right, if we're at chapter 1, they read for about 15 minutes. We're about to be approximately at page 16, considering they're using 0.14 font.
That's right. Yeah. So maybe I should just say a few words about this.
Yeah,
I don't know, because I'm assuming that our listeners probably have not listened to or read Lord of the World. This is my first time through it. It's so it was written in 1907 by Robert Hugh Benson, who's actually a Catholic priest, but he was an Anglican priest. Kind of like our namesake here at Newman University, John Henry Newman, who was an Anglican priest, converted into the Catholic Church. He experienced a lot of personal struggle because of this. His family was really like typical story of that time. In England, even in 1907, Catholicism was not, let's say, there was a sort of tolerance for it. It wasn't the old school persecution anymore. And they had full legal rights, but that doesn't mean that it was a very respectable faith. I mean, something you would, associate with Irishmen and weird Italians. It's not an English religion. It wouldn't have been thought that. And so this was a very bizarre thing for a. He had some reputation as an Anglican priest, and for him to give up all of the promise that he held in the Anglican Church, he probably could have been a bishop or something, to become a Catholic priest. A lot of people thought that was pretty foolish. And then he writes this novel. This is a science fiction novel, a religious science fiction novel. And it's not science fiction in the same way that H.G. Wells or The World was. It's more of a social science fiction novel, meaning that he's imagining a world 100 years or so in the future where all of the things he describes in the prologue of this book have taken place. And essentially, you have 3 blocks of the world that have all kind of consolidated into massive nations. So you have the Americas, you have Europe and Africa, I think.
I think that's right. Because then he, as far as I know, he's just described the rest as the East.
And then
it's just the East.
Yeah.
They kept saying the East does this or the East will do that.
Right. There's a little bit, I mean, he's right. He's, one of the things when you read an old novel like this, you have to be generous and charitable. And I mean, there's a little bit of yellow peril here with the East. But still, so the idea is that these 3 factions, especially the East and Europe, are at the brink of war when the book starts. And humanism, what they call, I have a different word for it, but it's what I would call humanism, has progressed steadily and sort of taken over religious institutions and pushed them to the outskirts. Protestantism has pretty much disappeared. So the only Christianity that's left, at least in the West, is really Catholicism in this sort of imagined future that he has. And then the rest of the book is about what happens when the Antichrist finally arrives into the situation and starts doing his things in this world. There you go. That's what the book's about.
So I haven't made it as far as him yet, but as of right now, you told me you wanted to see my perspective for being the non-Catholic in the room, and I think more will come up as I get deeper in the novel. But right now, the novel seems very political.
Oh yeah.
And the whole opening bit where they're talking about all of that, and then how Catholicism is starting to struggle and getting shut out in areas. The way they're wording it, it sounds like a war room.
Yes.
Like the way they're the way they're stating it. They're like Catholicism's been shut out in the Northwest area, but we're growing over here. Like they're talking about it like almost positions. Like think of like the generals looking at a map and they're like, we're losing here, but they're actually using the terms losing and winning.
Yeah. Well, they will continue that sort of militaristic language throughout the novel. So you'll hear them talking about, I'm going to mispronounce this French word, free shooters. So these would be certain champions for the Catholic faith. You'll hear about lieutenants. I'm glad you caught on that. That's certainly true. Yeah.
Because I found that fascinating. I was like talking about it like throughout war. And
well, when he wrote this, part of what's lurking in the background of this novel. So when he wrote this, a few decades before, maybe just shy of half a century before or so, the Papal States had finally been lost to the Pope. So up to that point, so it's within living memory of him writing this book that the Pope actually had an army. Okay. And so the Pope had to sign a treaty. This is why Vatican City is the smallest nation on earth, and it's a nation, is because they signed a treaty with the government of Italy saying that the Pope has jurisdiction, temporal jurisdiction over this territory, and you have no right to tell him what goes on within these bounds.
Yeah.
Everywhere else belongs to Italy. Up to that point, the Pope had a great deal of political power, which was manifested in things like having an army. So, this is part of what the syllabus of errors is condemning, are certain books that would have challenged the Pope's right to have temporal power, asserting they only have spiritual authority, not temporal authority. Today, it's a totally different world, but he's still remembering a little of that, and I think you have some echoes. But on the other hand, okay, so part of what this is about is not physical warfare, and it's not spiritual warfare in the sense of like angels and demons, like in a Frank Peretti novel.
Yeah.
But it is spiritual warfare. It's like a war of ideas. Yeah, that's very much what this book is about.
Oh, and you reminded me, he says that we've reclaimed Rome.
Yeah. You'll get to that.
Okay. So I'm sure they'll get more, but that was, so the Vatican has expanded.
Yes.
In actual territory.
Okay. Yes. So I know you haven't gotten to this part of the novel yet, but one of the weird things about this book is he imagines like a worst possible future, but embedded in this worst possible future, there is this sort of like idealistic fantasy land, which is Rome. And the idea is that when all of this stuff is shaken out, that basically the Pope says, okay, we will give you all of the churches in Italy. You'll just give us the city back. And then, yeah, you kind of have like this little insulated envelope of Catholicism in a sea of secularism. And that's kind of, and so you get, it'd be like Catholic Disneyland. And the exact, like, well, it's interesting. I wouldn't want to live in this Catholic Disneyland. But it's an interesting idea of what Robert Hugh Benson, if he could like carve out his little piece of territory that was fully Catholic, what this would look like for him. And that's really interesting to me. It's kind of weird, but yeah. So that's what that's referring to. Yeah. So they have Rome, but that's about it.
Yeah, they gave up everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it feels like I think overall maybe I'm just still at a point of setup for everything.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Where I'm at, but he's doing a great job at world building and not doing it all at once, and then like just feeding it to us where we can take it in and understand. But like
yeah, it's magnificent.
Later on, I think it's when Oliver and Mabel are talking, introduced to them. We're getting more of like the idea of the conflict between the factions where America stands. They're giving us input that America's been the reason that East hasn't attacked Europe yet. They could be holding them back. And equally, we get the mention of that Catholicism's mostly fallen out of America, and they've all given into humanism. And then it gives like it gives a strange description of humanism where like it goes through like a spiel of like there is no God because God is human. There are no prophets because prophets are the teachers, and
yes,
and you know, it goes on so forth. And I was like, okay, it's like they're really saying like they're pretty much promoting a very atheistic idea of like where it's just us. And maybe it's elaborated on more, but just based off of the like quick rundown, I was like, they're really pushing for like give up on like confined religion ideas. Let's all be.
I'm glad you're bringing this up. Okay. I don't think it's atheistic humanism. There's an aspect of atheistic humanism still around, but it's not atheistic humanism. In fact, the communists seem to be mostly associated with the East. They're the enemies.
Yeah.
So there's some parallels with communism in these new ideas, but it's not exactly Marxism. It is not. Let's say I think it's something more insidious than atheistic secular humanism from his point of view. But I would actually agree with this. So there's something mystical about this. Have you noticed this? That there's this idea that have they talked about euthanasia yet in your part?
No, I don't believe they've mentioned euthanasia.
So they treat euthanasia as a sacrament almost, in that there's this is what I mean. An atheist would not talk like this. They talk about how you have a duty at the end of your life to, when you start, you're no longer contributing to society, whatever that means. You have a duty then to volunteer your life so that your life force will enter up into like this collective and be available for newer expressions of life. So an atheist wouldn't talk that.
Yeah.
typically. I mean, there might be, but typically, there's a mystical idea here, and it's really this is an important part of the novel. It's an inversion of the doctrine of the incarnation, where God has become man. And in here, so God has humbled himself and become part of our family in Jesus Christ. In this novel, the opposite has happened. Humanity has realized that it is actually divine. And so we don't need God to come down to us because we just realize that we're all bad. And we realize that the divine principle isn't something we have to reach out for. It's inherently, it's our possession already. So that's not exactly an atheistic idea. There's something, it's a sort of pantheism, but it's a kind of, it's interesting because that's also an Eastern idea, and you get the sense that the pantheism of this new thing that has taken over the West is not, let's say, sort of Hindu type of pantheism. This is more of a where the divine, in that sort of pantheism, you still have gods that are like the ultimate expression of divinity. Here we don't need those anymore because the ultimate expression of divinity is us. I've been chatting.
No, you're free. Yeah. But one thing I think I want to stress again that he wrote this in 1907.
Yeah.
Because I'm continually like blown away with the things that he includes in this novel. Like
well, yeah, I want to hear about this.
Well, aside from actual technologies, like the big infinite emphasis on communism, and communism's taking over the East, and I'm like, I keep reminding myself, this is before like the Red Scare. This is before everyone was terrified. Like,
well, yeah, it's before it's before Leninism.
Yeah, he somehow was like, and maybe he didn't actually think that communism was going to blow up like it did, but he saw it as like a fear. And
I think doesn't he also have communism taking over the Americas?
I think
but it's been suppressed there.
Yeah.
But I think it's a part of the history he's had. Yeah, so I mean, it's not like 100% spot on, but
yeah,
still,
but like the fact that it's just, and then that's the continued fear here. I'm like,
yeah, I see what you mean.
This actually happened. Communism was the scare. It was the big fear, and it was the East that it went through. So I'm like, when I stop thinking about that, when he's describing that, I'm like, hey, wow, he wrote this in 1807. Like,
maybe that doesn't strike me as so prescient because I read a lot of Catholic literature from that time, and there was a big anxiety among all here's like Pope Leo the 13th in the I want to say 1870s. It might have been a little later than that. He wrote an encyclical called Rerum Novarum, where he outlines the dangers of prison there. This is in the late 1800s. And that's a major encyclical. He also warns of the dangers of capitalism in that same encyclical. And one of the dangers is that when capitalism runs rampant, it makes the working class want to become communists. And this is something that all of the bishops and all of this is a major anxiety of, let's say, the hierarchy, at least, of the church. So maybe it did strike me, but I see what you're saying. Yeah, he's actually able to see that it's not just going to be a sort of rumbling movement that's actually going to have its day.
Yeah.
Okay. That is. Thank you for saying that because I hadn't appreciated it maybe as much as you did.
And then the other thing is the technologies that he assumes are going to come out. Well, in the prologue, he was describing where the conversations taking place, and he's like, well, in the future, we're actually able to have, he doesn't say basements, he describes basements, and then he says that they're in a room without windows because it's 40 feet underground.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, okay, like that's a small thing, but I was like, you got it. We have basements, you know. And
40 feet underground though?
that's but you know, he was on track.
Sure. Okay.
Basement.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So then he later talks about how the temperature is regulated within the building, within the room.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yeah. Like he doesn't have it exactly the same as how we have it, but I was like, he realized we're gonna be like, and like to the full extent to we do, where there's just a little spot and you just go boop boop and say what the temperature you want.
Yeah, I missed that, but you're right. Yeah, assuming that there'll be a sort of air conditioning system.
Yeah.
Which in 1907, no one would imagine that.
Then the other one was he talks about I'm able to what was like a tram and the automatic doors opened up for her to get on and off. And I was like, well, they definitely wouldn't have had an idea of a tram transport system back then. So I was like,
Subway.
again, he predicted the subway.
When were the first subways built? But yeah,
I don't know, but definitely not then. But
right.
So then the other thing that we don't have, I noted, was he talked about how when they were done with their dinner, they collected their dishes, put them in the center piece of the table, and it collapsed, and you could hear the dishes go down and turn land, and then the centerpiece closed back up again.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, he had an idea of that. I'm presuming a type of dishwasher or something is like actually built into our like eating spaces.
Where do we have that?
When we're done, we just yeah, we gotta physically go load that thing up and close the box, you know. Yeah, because they're your dishwasher, aren't they?
Well, yeah. Yes, they are. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, so that's the one technology I don't have that's different. Can you imagine? But everything else, I'm like, we actually have that, you know. And then
he doesn't really have motor cars, I don't think.
Yeah, I haven't seen
everyone's using these trams or whatever. I don't know. We haven't seen like every picture he's given us has been of an urban setting. So I don't know, maybe outside of city centers you would have. He doesn't.
Yeah, because aside from trams, we're getting walking. They're still walking.
Yeah.
The one thing when the Percy left in the beginning, it said he walked out to the street and he saw the beautiful light of day, but then it turned and said, because there's always the beautiful light of day due to the technologies of being lighting the streets, illuminating the streets at night even.
So Edison had invented the light bulb by now, and it was starting to catch on. That it wouldn't have been the idea of an illuminated city like this.
Yeah,
he kind of sees where, you know, what the potentialities of electric lighting.
And that one's more predictable. You know, that one makes sense. But he's like, "Well, illuminate the street." But the way he described it made it sound even like more illuminated than our streets at night are. You know, he made it sound like it appears that the sun is still shining at night.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, which would be awful.
Yeah, I really appreciate a little nighttime. You know, like
right. But yeah, I got that too. That sense. You know, a lot of people are more. Okay, so from a Catholic point of view, this novel, just a few weeks ago, I think it was Pope Francis referred to this novel. So this is something that Catholics are still reading, our popes are still reading. I think that Pope Benedict had also referred to it a couple times. I heard about it shortly after I became Catholic from my spiritual director. He recommended it to me. I'm just now getting to it nearly 20 years later.
Now you can finally check it off that list.
Yeah, well, I did tell him I'm finally reading it. But it's you know, a lot of people are more impressed with his prediction of social realities. Now, there are a lot of things he's like way off the mark. So I don't want to like imprison him as some sort of prophet or something. But for instance, the one of the really obvious, I think that his prediction of this sort of humanism is actually maybe more prescient than a lot of people would realize at first. We can talk more about that later. But the other thing is the ubiquity of euthanasia. This is something that's a major part of the book. And in 1907, people would have been horrified by the idea of euthanasia. It would just be, most people would have considered that to just be a barbaric practice. And today, I don't know if you've kept up with what's happening, for instance, in Canada. It's a big debate right now because euthanasia is just like, I can't remember what percent it is. It's like a startling number of the deaths in Canada are due to physician-assisted suicide, and for all sorts of things, mental illness. It's very easy to get this, and one of the problems they're realizing is there are a lot of stories about poor people who don't have enough money to pay for the medical bills, so they're choosing to end their lives instead. And this is like it's kind of being presented to them as a valid option. You can, you can fight off this emphysema or whatever it is you're struggling with, I think cancer, or we can, if you don't want to pay all that money, we can take care of you over here. And there's I, as a practicing Catholic, I find euthanasia objectionable in all cases, but we're seeing this sort of extremely dark side of it. In Canada, in some ways, is more progressive than, say, Belgium. There's some stories about this. Like, it's easier to get suicide in Canada than it is in some of the really progressive European countries that sort of pioneered this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how much is spread here, but I know that in California, like, you don't even have to get assisted. Like, you just say, go fill out your documents, and then they send you like a little, like, it's almost like an orange juice packet. That's true. You drop your powder in your glass and stir it, and then it just says drink it all at once.
Yeah. So yeah, there are parts of the United States that are a little more like Canada. So yeah, and I think it's true. California is one. So a lot of readers of this novel read about that and they think, oh wow, because in 1907, this would not have been, who knew about euthanasia in 1907? It was out there. There were, let's say, free thinkers who were suggesting this as a possibility, but it wouldn't have been a very widely accepted idea. Today, it's
1907, major technologies, they had to even do euthanasia and be sure, lay your head right here, and I promise I'll swing the hammer so fast you won't feel a thing.
Well, they could have done it through injection.
Yeah,
they had cyanide.
Yeah, but back then, you would have felt it.
It
wouldn't have been a peaceful euthanasia.
No, you're right. It would have been difficult. Yeah. So what else? So as I'm reading this, I was thinking, oh, Austin. I knew it was a Catholic novel. I didn't realize like how Catholic. This is like super, super Catholic. And I'm just curious, like, what, as a non-Catholic reading it, is it just come off weird, or is it exotic, or is it something you can appreciate?
Maybe I haven't gotten deep enough.
Okay.
But
We'll see what he says next week. I'll try to ask this again.
Honestly, where I'm at, like I can see that this is a Catholic novel, but it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like out of the ordinary to me as of yet. It doesn't, nothing comes off as strange or weird. Like, honestly, like I said, where the novel's at, it feels more like a political novel.
Okay. That's fair. And I think if it were written today, it would be different because this is written before Vatican II, and so there's a more of a sense of brotherhood between Catholics and non-Catholic Christians. Here, it really is kind of like we have one ark of salvation, it's the Catholic Church, and then everyone else.
Yeah,
There's a little bit of that.
pretty much where I'm at. That's the main thing is that I've gotten from the Catholic perspective is just, well, there is no other Christian church, but Catholicism's the only thing left.
Everyone else came.
Yeah, and I don't know. To me, that maybe it's just that I know that this is the novel of the Catholic perspective. It didn't strike me as odd or like or whatever. I don't know. Equally, that's gone to quite a few more masses than I used to. I've talked to you a lot.
So yeah,
Catholicism doesn't come up to me as like a scary option. Like I'm happy with just being non-affiliate, but equally I'm like I respect and appreciate a lot of the practices of the Catholic Church.
we'll see if it's a little scarier once you get to the middle of this.
Probably, I'm expecting there's gonna be something next week that I'm like I'm expecting next week I've got like, whoa, wait a minute, what is hold on. Like, you need to explain this.
There might be a little of it. Well, good. I'm glad at least that you're enjoying it so far. It's very old fashioned. But yeah, I'm loving it. Well, I thought of another thing that a lot of people comment on when they talk about this novel is another prediction he makes is this sort of just massive apostasy in all of the church, Protestant and Catholic, people just leaving in droves, and that was pretty pressing as well. So that's I'm sure you've seen the numbers of people leaving, let's say, historical denominations, waves. So that was pretty accurate.
I will. Last time I brought up that, before, and I even met the Antichrist again. I've met who's going to be.
Felsenberg. We hear about Felsenberg.
Yeah, actually, before I say what I say, I'll mention the briefness I've got on Felsenberg.
Okay.
So it was just they were talking about how this guy suddenly popped up almost as like a media icon. Like they were
that's
like,
a good way to describe him.
there's this new young guy. He's smart. He's sharp, and they say he seems to be, like almost the voice of the Americas. He's the reason the East hasn't done anything yet. And I was like, okay, interesting. Like this single guy, and then the big catch is the exact words he says are, he seems to have come out of nowhere.
Ooh, there you go. Yes.
That was my big catch. I was like, because media icon, they said last week a book just came out about him.
Yeah.
But then they equally say there's really nothing on where this guy's past or where he came from. He just came out of nowhere. And I was like,
that's how we felt when Obama became president.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything about
a few people were though.
I know.
So you're not wrong.
But there was that sort of sense like, who is this guy? And how is it that he's actually going to become president?
Yeah.
Because
I
knew who he was.
It seems like this is the guy that people would be like, hey, why isn't he running things like which is kind of how I would suspect it would go, because it says that he will bring peace, people, he will come up as friendly, and I'm like, came out of nowhere. That's where I'm like, that's the one. That's the. I think that's the guy.
He's got, he's got some Antichrist mojo working for him. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, that's
And,
good. That's a good catch. I think you're right. That's
And as of
good
right
clue.
now, I think the only thing it mentioned of his physical appearance was that he was young. It hasn't mentioned anything else.
Has it talked about his white hair?
How he has white hair and that he's about 33. It mentions how Oliver. It mentioned Oliver has white hair.
Yeah, Oliver also has white hair.
Yeah, I was like, what's up with everyone having white hair?
It is bizarre. And Percy is also the same age. And has white hair. So Percy, Father Percy, is the protagonist of the novel, and you'll hear later how when he sees Felsenburgh for the first time, he's aware that he looks quite a bit like him. And so these guys all look similar, which is I'm not exactly sure what that's all about, to tell you the truth.
And maybe we'll figure it out.
Maybe, but I don't know why the white hair. That's yeah, I'm really perplexed by that because
well, maybe it was they were saying that Felsenburgh had the white hair, and I just mixed it up.
I think he might be right about Oliver. I can't remember it. Percy for sure has white hair. When Oliver and Mabel meet Percy, they'll remark on how much he looks like his bird. So that's coming up. Something else. Okay, so you realize why 33 is so important, right?
You started mentioning it a little bit last time, but it's how old Jesus was.
Right. So the fact that Felsenburgh is 33 years old when he comes out of nowhere into the world scene. By the way, when Jesus started his ministry, it must have seemed, well, you read the Gospel of Mark, you get a good feel of this. John the Baptist baptizing people in the wilderness, saying, I'm preparing the way of the Lord. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, here comes this 30-year-old man who's baptized by him, and he starts this ministry. So Jesus kind of comes out of nowhere. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? That sort of idea. And so Felsenburgh being the Antichrist, he's actually a sort of, say, false Christ here. And so it's important that they have the same age. That's what he's doing.
You know what else is important?
What's
This
that?
made me think of Watchmen. They were like, there's a God who's American.
Yes.
Antichrist is American.
I know. That is weird. I'm surprised by that actually. So I don't know if that has to do with what Robert Hugh Benson thinks about Americans.
Yeah. In that the Americas, the Watchmen, the Americans were like, there's a God, he's American. But I mean, here we have the Brits going, there's an Antichrist. Well, he's American. You wouldn't catch him coming out of here. Yeah.
Well, okay, so this is another thing that he's very, let's say, prescient about, is that the role of America in the future. So in 1907, this is before the First World War, the United States was not a world power.
This is before the U.S. was a world power. You're right, before the First World War, before the Second World War, because it's once we get involved in the First World War is when we start to say, hey, you know what? We throw our cap down. Like, we're watching everybody.
Exactly.
We're just not watching ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
But he's already got the America saying, like, looking out for everybody, watching everybody, saying, East, hey, why don't you go? How about you don't attack our pals, Europe?
Yeah.
So, that's also ahead of.
Oh, yeah.
Ahead of the time.
That's
good observation.
Yeah. That just occurred to me, like, how weird that would be for, But yeah, I don't know why he's an American.
Yeah.
Apart from that.
And it's a lot of this stuff, it takes me like, I don't realize right away. Like we just realized now that America is watching the rest of the world is because we're used to it. We've already like got some of that, and a lot of modern literature that's we're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense because it's what we're used to. So it's good that we're catching like this was written in 1907.
Yeah.
Like again, that's why I'm coming back to that point. This is important that he wrote this in 1907.
Yeah, probably a lot of his readers like this is ridiculous.
I'm sure that's why it became popular in America. They picked it up and they said, "The Antichrist American." Oh no.
Yeah.
I realized I just represented America with a British accent, but
Yeah, it was a very cautionary.
yeah.
So, what other questions did you have? Or
And
observations?
one observation I made, this was very like brushed over. This was this quickly, like he said, well, an article came out 2 years ago that said that the planets out there are inhabited. And then it just kept going. I was like, that's a big deal. That's a big deal, not only to mention for like that this was written in 1907, but that this is for like a Catholic novel that just to outright say the planets outside of ours are inhabited, and then it just went past it and acted like it was nothing. I was like, hold on, like this is a big deal to bring up.
Yeah. So we've got a one of the things that I really love about this novel is he doesn't make this false religion that is pushing Christianity to the sidelines. He doesn't make it out to be some sort of monstrous, absurd entity. They're not like, okay, so for instance, they're not like offering child sacrifices in caves and to idols and things.
They're not holding people over. I'm
So, yeah. No, it's very very reasonable and actually attractive. And you can see why Catholicism wouldn't have a claim on this society anymore. And one of them is that we're discovering things like, oh, there is life on other planets. It doesn't excuse me. It doesn't sound like we've made contact with these.
It's just we identified that it is factual. That's the other thing. When it said that, the last thing it said about it was that is a fact. Yes. That's what the book outright says. That is a fact. They are out there. And then it goes on to the next thing.
So he recognizes that would have philosophical import for Christianity. And that's what that's there for. It's saying that there is the possibility, every time we make a scientific discovery, there is a possibility, maybe even a likelihood of some, let's say, the Christian faith has to accommodate it somehow.
Yeah.
And if it's not ready to do that, it can be a threat. And people will say, Christianity doesn't have the explanatory power that it used to. If there's life on other planets, then we're not all that anymore. It's weird though, because the whole point of this false religion is that we really are all that. But we're not, there's not a sense that we are the creatures of this caring body. We are the highest expression of divinity on this planet. That might be going on out there, but there's not this sort of relational, creaturely aspect. If there's other life out there, how to get there? Well, does it stand to reason that God would create people out there too? It creates I think you can accompany, there's still people who still believe and they still know that, but it's a little bit of a hiccup. You have to think through it. And every time that happens, there are going to be people who say, I don't think Christianity makes sense. So yeah, it's really, I'd forgotten that was in there, but that's a good point. That just little things like that. And it shows that, he's open to the possibility that that's a reality. A very traditionalist Catholic could say in 1907, there might be life on the moon. It's obvious he likes science fiction. He's read He's read Jules Verne. He's read H.G. Wells. This reminds me of Jules Verne a lot too. It reminds me of H.G. Wells more so.
Another thing was when he's just describing the household situation. We have Oliver's mom living with them as well, where it's not that it doesn't feel like that 1907 ideal of Mabel's supposed to stay at home, clean, cook. I don't get that vibe. Like, she equally talks about how, oh, I need to go out later and do this too. Like, she actually has a life of her own as well.
She's a socialite. She doesn't have a job.
Yeah, she doesn't have a job, but it's not like, what do you mean that you need to go out later? It's like, okay, yeah, you have your thing you need to go to. And then it talks about how his mom isn't happy with the way things. She hasn't adapted to like the new societal norms, and that she's, especially, the big thing was she was hooked on how dinner's made and the dishes go down. She was like, she doesn't like that.
So that'll become really important later. And you haven't gotten there, but she's there is a sort of, let's say, traditional Catholicism is not at home in this new technological world, and there's a sort of suspicion in this novel about technology. It's not that technology is like an integral unit. There's a sense of like wonder technology that it's dangerous. And so you'll see, like, for instance, when you get to Rome, you'll see none of these new inventions are allowed within the city of Rome.
I thought you said it was Disneyland. I thought there'd be roller coasters.
Catholic Disneyland.
There's not a roller coaster ride where they hop on a fake ark and go over some waves.
Noah's rough and ready art.
Yeah.
No, it's I said Rome. I think it's not Rome. It's allowed. It's within like Vatican. So once you get past a certain boundary, it's like all that stuff's left out. He's shocked that there's a typewriter in his room. That really cracked me up. So he comes into his room. There's a typewriter. He's like, "What's that doing here? I didn't think modern technology wasn't allowed."
Yeah.
So because it's not just a pen and paper.
Well, what's like clearly modern technology is allowed in the Vatican.
Today?
Like,
oh yeah.
Still, when I visited there a few years ago, it's still, and it's mainly the architecture that makes it feel that way. But it makes
the way people dress.
And the way people dress. It's still like technology was all there, but aside from that, it did feel like. And it was nice. Like, I thought it was very cool, and like we've kept that this vibe of the more of a traditional just style vibe of the area.
There is an intentional. I think that's what this is about in the book as well. It's an intentional effort to maintain that sense of continuity with the past, not just like going on to the next. Just because it's the next. If you accept something new, there has to be a reason for it. It's not that new things are bad, but it's a very intentional process. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's cool.
I don't think I've shared with you. That's actually where I got the necklace I always wear.
Look at that. Yeah, that's a beautiful crucifix.
Silver. I got this while I was at the Vatican, and so it has. This is back. It has St. Peter on the back too.
Sorry. No, that's the Pope Benedict. That's not Pope. That's the Saint Benedict's seal.
They like, but
it's actually it's what we call a demon chasing crucifix. It's a Saint Benedict's cross. Yeah, no, they're really, I'll tell you what that's about.
I'm glad to have that.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
But
I
then
have it in my bag.
Well, supposedly they this is where, because this was in a shop in the Vatican. So this is where I'm like, as a actually. They were like, they showed us these crucifixes. They were like, these ones have all been blessed by the.
Okay.
And
they can't sell them after they've been blessed.
that's what I was like. I was like, because they were saying that in this shop, and I was like, okay, we're at the Vatican, we're outside the church. I was like, I feel like you're just trying to get Americans to buy.
Maybe.
But I was like, but even if so, I still appreciate what you're selling me.
That's cool. Yeah. Technically, you're not supposed to sell. They have ways of getting around it. They can say, I'm not selling you the blessing attached to it. I'm selling you the material that's been blessed. But it's a little. We can't frown on that.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
That's probably it's from. It's because you're still.
Yeah. Technically, you're supposed to sell it before it's blessed, and then you can have it blessed. But you cannot increase the price because it's blessed. You can't sell a spiritual good. That's called simony. Good.
Yeah.
So, was there anything else about the book that
We went through all the notes
Okay.
that I had in there thus
I
far.
don't have a lot of time. Would you let me read? This is my favorite part of the book. So it's very rare that, a lot of times I'll read a novel and I'll find it, it'll enrich my life. It'll help me go through stuff that I'm going through, help me think through things. It's very rare I read a novel, I'm like, I want to start doing this. And this novel had something that I would like to actually imitate. So it describes, this is in chapter 2 of part 2. I think you've heard this. And this is shortly after so Percy he goes into a church and he begins to go through a process of mental prayer. And it describes very detailed his process of mental prayer, and it's just gorgeous. I think it's a little long, so bear with me out there in YouTube land. I'm gonna start in the middle of the second paragraph here. It says, he let his eyes wander round in his church for a few minutes before beginning his deliberate prayer, drinking in the glory of the place, listening to the thunderous chorus, the peal of the organ, and the thin mellow voice of the priest. There on the left shone the refracted glow of the lamps that burned before the Lord in the sacrament. On the right, a dozen candles winked here and there at the foot of the gaunt images. High overhead hung the gigantic cross with that lean, emaciated, poor man who called all who looked on him to the embraces of a god. Then he hid his face in his hands, drew a couple of long breaths, and set to work. He began, as his custom was in mental prayer, by a deliberate act of self-exclusion from the world of sense. Under the image of sinking beneath the surface, he forced himself downwards and inwards, till the peal of the organ, the shuffle of footsteps, the rigidity of the chair back beneath his wrists, all seemed apart and external, and he was left a single person with a beating heart, an intellect that suggested image after image, and emotions that were too languid to stir themselves. Then he made his second descent, renounced all that he possessed and was, and became conscious that even the body was left behind, and that his mind and heart, awed by the presence in which they found themselves, clung close and obedient to the will which was their Lord and protector. He drew another long breath or two as he felt that presence surge about him. He repeated a few mechanical words and sank to that peace which follows the relinquishment of thought. There he rested for a while. Far above him sounded the ecstatic music, the cry of trumpets, and the shrilling of the flutes. But they were as insignificant street noises to one who was falling asleep. He was within the veil of things now, beyond the barriers of sense and reflection, in that secret place to which he had learned the road by endless effort, in that strange region where realities are evident, where perceptions go to and fro with the swiftness of light, where the swaying will catches now this, now that act, molds it and speeds it, where all things meet, where truth is known and handled and tasted, where God immanent is one with God transcendent, where the meaning of the external world is evident through its inner side, and the church and its mysteries are seen from within a haze of glory. So he lay a few moments, absorbing and resting. Then he aroused himself to consciousness and began to speak. And then it goes through a little bit of his verbal prayer. So now he's that image of sinking into almost, in psychological terms, like the subconscious, is really, really beautiful and powerful to me. I don't know. Have you ever experienced this kind of prayer, Austin? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're fine. What I was gonna say is I haven't got this far yet. Just that was the first time I heard that. But even for those who aren't religious or can't relate or don't appreciate prayer, like that's still just beautifully written. Like
yes,
that can be appreciated, I would think, by any.
I agree. Yeah, it's beautiful literature. But it's describing, I've had a few privileged moments where I've experienced something like that. But I mean, I would never have been able to articulate it this way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like to even begin to describe it. I don't really talk about it because it's just, it won't do it justice. And that's so magnificent. It's just, anyway. So I'm really, it's a gift to be able to read that. And it's also something, for me to aspire to. It talks about how he's able to do this because he's done this. He's had a habit of made long effort. Yeah, and that's what that requires. And
maybe it's to describe it so beautifully. Like I've had moments of where feel different or better, more connected than others, but nothing like it could just be like he just described that so beautifully. I'm like, yeah, I haven't had something that beautiful.
Well, maybe someday you will. I hope you do. And I hope I have more of them. Yeah, that's certainly not something I can't do that yet. Where I'm like, okay, but on a good day every now and then. My problem is I have ADHD.
I was gonna say my brain's too jumpy. Like I'll be actually like focusing in prayer, and then all of a sudden I'm like, no, like I'm sorry to interrupt your time. I just to jump to something else over here. So it's about time for me to leave. One of the things that's helped me with that, though, I heard this from someone else who I think has ADHD. I'm not sure, but he was just saying that a lot of times we get annoyed by those distractions, and what he does is he incorporates them into his prayer. When he like makes himself aware of them, and then just like says, "Okay, Lord, I don't know why I'm thinking about this. Do you? Can we talk about this? Why is my heart moving towards this right now?" And then you can get back to maybe whatever work you're wanting to do with God there. But I think that's been really helpful. Again, even that requires a level of persistence and intention that I don't always have. Yeah. But that's a good thing to strike for. I like that. That is a good.
Well, thank you, Austin.
Thank you.
I don't know about you. This is fun. I love talking about this.
No, I do too. That's why I wanted to start the podcast with you, so we could. But we'll see what next week has to offer. I'll get a lot farther.
Okay.
We'll see if I have a lot of confusion or disagreement.
I can't wait to see what you think about Rome, because it is kind of far out. So it'll be fun to talk about that. The world needs a little talk. And the Lord of the world needs a little talk. Thanks. Thank you. Yes, a messy office is a LinkedIn office.
Yeah, exactly.